Welcome everyone to another in the CFO Academy webinar series. Thanks for joining. So first of all, a quick reminder and a reference back to one of the earlier webinars. I talked about 4 ingredients to effective quality budgeting and forecasting in a success matrix, combining facets of budgeting like speed and your ability to do it efficiently and on time, with having a good basis and rationale for budgeting, and obviously that driving confidence, but a key facet basically being that of participation. In other words, business involvement and ownership, and tapping the tacit knowledge and experience of your front line staff and actually incorporating those in quality outcomes. So we covered that before, and obviously the focus today is on that participation, which we see as important and critical. So that's what we're covering today. Lessons from the field, so I'll be covering a few references to some real case studies and stories about how you get a business to budget and overcoming user adoption issues. So first of all, over our time basically are handling many budgeting projects with a diverse range of different businesses. Early on in the engagement, this is the type of feedback that we actually get that we're trying, a business might be trying to overcome. So for many businesses, budgeting is not an inclusive process. And these are the types of hurdles basically put up by those wanting to drive stronger user adoption. Things like, well, we can't even get the business to face up to monthly reporting, so how are we going to get them to budget or forecast? People aren't strong financially, they're not good with spreadsheets, they struggle with the templates. To a certain extent, they do their own thing. I'm not quite sure that they're actually interested. They feel they don't have a little influence, and it's difficult to involve them. So, these are the types of comments that basically put up. So, what has PA seen as an effective approach to change? Armed with an appropriate technology, what can you achieve? What lessons and approaches can overcome those hurdles? So I'm just going to put up, say, 4 or 5 today. There's a diverse range of different things that you could do, but basically I thought I'd share these with you. So first of all, we engage many organizations seeking improvement. Okay, and what I observe basically is businesses are often inclined to start the journey or focus in the wrong place. The perception is often, let's start with the corporate needs and corporate budgeting, and then target the business budget holders. Now I think that basically comes from the typical perceptions outlined in the last slide. I think it's often seen as too hard. So let's look at a real case study in hand. Let's look at a membership-based not-for-profit organisation who deliver scores of programs across metropolitan and regional Victoria and the ACT. They target around 5,000 people a year in providing support services for the around mental illness and their families. And there's probably about 250 different staff members, about 400 volunteers, and over 1,500 members that they need to basically think about in terms of resource management and planning, and in terms of delivering effective outcomes. Now they came to us in a world of pain, had a 4-month budget process, strong user adoption issues with the current spreadsheet regimes they had, which culminated basically in the budget manager from the finance team doing a kind of like 1-month road trip to try and support and educate and get people involved and participating in project performance reporting needs. So we had an early workshop, and in the early workshop there was a very diverse range of different budget models that were put up basically as possible scope. And the ones we seem to be starting to focus on were those of around corporate the budgets, IT allocations, marketing, rent reforecasts and stuff like that. And it appeared to me that really the candidates that would actually truly change the organisation are the ones which would address their primary goal, which is improving the life of the program managers in supporting the service to the community. So we looked at this and we turned that project on its head, okay? And the revealing thing was that they actually thought that was too hard a challenge, so they thought they'd start in the centre. Now the reverse happens. It's actually the people outside, basically, who can provide you the biggest win and the earliest win. And if you can get that over, you change the organisational perspective in terms of budgeting. So if I look at that, you know, we've got these, like I said, program managers working in different communities, provide them a robust, basically, a way of replacing Excel, and creates an online capacity for them to actually start, plan, and budget in their own terms around program performance. And this is a relatively light touch thing for them to do. And then basically, what it did is it had a big impact. All those results immediately accumulated in the central budget, which basically the CFO was then able to use. Okay, so there was no roadshow. Okay, and those program managers have become fans, and they're owning and participating in that budgeting process. So do target them early, because I think technology is not the impediment anymore. So just summarising there, focus on satisfying the many before the few. Generally, budget holders out there in the field are light touch, what I call big impact users. So they're very easy to actually sort of target in terms of an early project win. And they provide a tipping point for change within an organisation and a much bigger impact. And they make, for instance, your budgeting much more strategic in terms of how the organisation holistically views it. The second observation is, I think one of the impediments is what typically budgeting looks like for the business within an organisation. This is a revealing PowerPoint slide from a Gartner research organisation. They're having a discussion about, you know, the financial perspective. But it's very typical that, you know, this is the way finance views data. This is how it's perceived. You know, the typical rows and columns, financial statement formats, reference to charts of accounts, and so on. So it's no wonder sometimes that because it ignores things like business drivers and doesn't put it in business terms, that the business finds it hard to relate to this and needs quite a lot of support in terms of planning on this basis. And it leads to statements such as this, which we got from Sydney Cricket Ground Trust, which was another organisation we helped with their planning process. And right at the beginning, the problem they put was there was a complete lack of ownership by budget owners. Finance was seen as gatekeepers, spreadsheet controllers, which they had to be given the fragility of the spreadsheets, but basically their spreadsheets were quite revealing in that they really did look like financial statements. They were hard for marketing and different operations, corporate hospitality and so on to kind of relate to. Now, if you think about Sydney Cricket Ground Trust, they look after the famous SCG in the Sydney football grounds. They provide world-class venue facilities to members, patrons, competitors. 1.3 million people pass through their turnstiles, and they provide and support a lot of different codes and events. So they're an event-driven business, and their business is actually affected by a high degree of variability, such as seasonal, sport code, or team performance, and so on. So they really had to start planning on that basis. And by actually turning the plans from, you know, things that look like financial statements to one that were event-driven, okay, it meant that it was far easier for the rest of the organisation to participate in that budgeting process, and there's far greater take-up in terms of ownership. And as the result, basically, of addressing it in those terms, this was the statement that that same stakeholder made at the very end of that process. Everyone has found participation easy and results quick to derive. Budget owners now actively participate on their own terms, based on activity, but within a controlled framework. Okay, so they built up trust and accountability, and basically that is now seen as a business process not a financial process. So budget in business terms, it does change how users adopt the system. And just a quick summary there. So business terms with financial outputs, like I said, doing that really means that it's far easier for the business to take up, and a change of staff basically quickly come in and relate to what they're actually seeing. And it provides proper business rationale, so it's more effective planning as well. And think about giving value adds back to those people who are planning. Reports and analysis alongside the budgeting really helps them, in that process. And it moves the ownership from finance to the business. Now, the third one is a very common observation. Think about something that you do once a year. I would have trouble recalling that event and exactly how I went about it. Or annual budgets, being annual in nature, tend to be once-a-year events for people within the business. And that breeds unfamiliarity. It becomes alien. It's an infrequent event, and it often is seen as a burden. Now, a further complication of business, basically, is there are many ways to do things. The business user is asked to report, analyze, forecast in different ways, sometimes in different frequencies. It's just hard, okay, for the business to take a process on like that. So if you take all these processes, they actually share common structures, organizational perspectives, even formats, people, and so on. They share lots of interdependencies. So if you can actually consolidate that user experience, you'll benefit not just from the natural synergies of doing so, like a single central repository of how you do business performance, but you'll also increase the familiarity and frequency of use, and you'll make planning more of a permanent, continuous process. So again, simplify the user experience. You need to turn that annual event into a frequent, regular, recurring one. Put it alongside things like reporting, and basically you will start to see those synergies, and you'll see a much stronger user adoption. So look for synergistic processes. Reporting and forecasting are quite often those. Remember, they often share common structures and formats. It's just different levels of detail. And consolidate that user experience. And start to touch the user or the consumer more often. And I think that frequency provides familiarity. And that provides a consistent performance thinking. And you'll start to see benefits in terms of training, continuity, shared awareness, and so on. Here's a quick one, which I often find. Executives, part of the budgeting process, they put their strategic input in. They give it a framework. These are the goals for the year. I take a cut off my strategic plan for the next 5 years or 10 years, and then I wait. And this budgeting process goes on for however long it takes, and at the very end I receive something and I review it. And during that process there's a complete lack of decision support, oversight and analysis. Okay, now for me, you need real time, okay, decision support during that process. Okay, and you'll need to shorten that process. There's a wealth of data to mine that's relevant to the executive decision-making process. So again, it rarely gets talked about sometimes in a lot of the early engagements we make with customers. So it's an odd statement to make, but that's the observation. So you need to think about filling that vacuum. And you need to focus on continuous executive decision support and give it to them in their terms. That might be a self-service dashboard, giving them visibility on how, for instance, the budgets are accumulating against that strategic framework. It might be access via their iPad in order for them to sort of keep a tab, basically, in terms of dashboarding or scorecarding. But do think of it And we normally drive a focus on that within an early focus of a workshop to actually make sure the executive user gets something out of this process other than an end result. And lastly, what I see is quite often when we come into an organisation, complete lack of budget process visibility. No real-time oversight, tracking or management. And not only does this simplify the user experience, because people know where they are and what they should be doing, okay, but it also allows you to target education and support. Okay, so if you can see, for instance, as in this example with Webjet, that there are a number of different budget holders and at what status they are, whether they're in progress or whether the project has been, the budget has been rejected, then obviously you can provide the right support and reach out when you need to. Okay, and actually having them actually see and interact with the budgeting process as part of a workflow where they can see at what stage they're at or what stage that organisation is at actually greatly helps. And this is often a perspective that is forgotten about. So questions here is, can you manage the process? Can you surface and understand user adoption issues? And can you target the support and education process? So with that in mind, what I would challenge you to do is put down your questions. What I'm doing is I'm going to monitor those and we'll have a little question session at the end. So do that, it's in the panel on the side. And just a quick reminder about the 5 things that I talked about today is target those budget holders of as many people basically as possible. Budget in business terms, simplify the user experience, consolidate synergistic processes such as forecasting, reporting and budgeting, increase the frequency of use. Think about making executives users and make the process visible. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a look at some of the questions, see what we've got. And we've got a few, so I'll tackle as many as I can. First of all, got a question here. How did I jump from budgets to reporting? One is an annual budget and the other is monthly. Okay. Look, I see there's no reason why a budget holder, okay, couldn't be reviewing his, say, monthly reporting progress against a budget, for instance, and using some analysis and decision support around that to help him with that review, and for him to immediately, or her, to immediately update the forecast all in that one place. Simplified user experience with all that basically being supported in the one place. And I think that's an example of continuous planning and moving from that annual budgeting event, basically, and actually looking at synergistic processes. They are synergistic. And that's what an engaged budget manager would often want. And we see that if they can move to that state, they often own the process. And that's their desired outcome. I've got another question here. Oh, this is an interesting one. Which one of the 5 do I consider the most important? That's an interesting one. I'd say you'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the organisational issues and opportunities are. You don't necessarily have to make choices, having said that. Most of these facets, indeed all of them, are generally delivered within a single can be delivered within a single project timeline within, say, 1 to 3 months. And we would determine the mix of focus and priorities up front in our workshop and in engagement with your executives and key stakeholders to ensure that you kind of get the right outcomes. And with, obviously, strong user adoption is a key critical success factor for any business improvement. So, like I said, I'm probably holding my cards there in terms of which is the most important. It really depends on your particular issues, and maybe you're quite happy for you to actually give us more detail and follow this up and we can see how we can assist there. How are you doing? I think that's great. Thank you very much for your time and for your questions. And I look forward to joining you again in 2 weeks' time. We'll have another segment. Like I said, just a reminder, there is a LinkedIn CFO Academy group that you can join. And if you want more on Professional Advantage, our case studies, our solutions, technology and methods, there's the email address and the phone number. And any ideas for future topics are welcomed. Thank you very much.